Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to another edition of the Monie podcast. If this is your first time, I want to say welcome. And if you've been rocking with me for a while, I just want to say thank you. As we step into the new year, I felt led to a very honest conversation, one that's uncomfortable, but necessary. Today, we're talking about outgrowing people, friends, relationships, even family dynamics without becoming bitter. Because let's be real, growth doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes growth looks like grief. For me, this episode is personal. I realize that I've become more aligned with my calling, my values, my faith, and even my peace. Certain relationships just didn't fit the version of me I was becoming anymore. And to be honest, that was very, very hard. You know, some of these were people I laughed with, prayed with, dreamed with, people who, knew the old me, the shy me, the people pleasing me, the version of me that stayed quiet to keep the peace. But growth has a way of asking you questions like, who are you becoming? And who can't go where you're going? This episode isn't about blaming anyone. It's about honoring the season and having the courage to release it with love. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about outgrowing and why it's not betrayal. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is, if I change, I'm being disloyal. But growth is not betrayal. Evolution is not abandonment. According to psychological research from Psychological Today, personal growth often leads to valued realignment. And when value shifts, relationships naturally change. Not because someone did something wrong, but because you're no longer speaking the same emotional language. Sometimes you outgrow people simply because, one, you're choosing healing over chaos. Come on now. Many of you can relate to that one. Two, boundaries over burned out. Three, purpose over people pleasing. And that doesn't make you cold. Doesn't make you cold at all. It makes you conscious. I had to accept that some people were meant for a chapter in my life, not the entire book. And that realization didn't come with fireworks. It came with tears. And many of you may have walked that same path. Let's talk about why bitterness shows up. I don't want people to often think that I'm bitter because, I outgrew someone or I've moved on. Absolutely not. Bitterness usually doesn't come from letting go. It comes from holding on too long. Holding on when you keep explaining yourself, you keep shrinking yourself, and you keep hoping they'll meet you where you are. There was a season where I noticed myself becoming resentful instead of joyful after certain interactions. And if you ever felt that way, like just being resentful after, interacting with certain individuals, and that was my cue. That was my cue because bitterness is often a signal that a boundary has been violated internally. As author Brianna West says, bitterness is a sign that you're betraying yourself. That quote stopped me in my tracks, because sometimes we're not mad at them. We're mad at ourselves for staying longer than we should have. How to let go without becoming bitter. So let's discuss that, because a lot of people feel like once they become bitter, people tend to really distance themselves. So let's talk about releasing people without trashing them. Sometimes when the friendship ends or the relationship ends, you don't have to talk negative about that individual. If you see them, you can just engage with a simple hi. But a lot of time when friendships end or relationships end, people feel that you've gained, like, automatically they're your enemy, or you're their enemy, vice versa. So you can release people without trashing them, without saying anything negative, and just move on with grace. Blessing people from a distance. If you hear that such and such is getting married or having a baby, blessings, wishing them well, without having to be so into their life. So that is a classic, blessing people from a distance. Not explaining yourself to everyone. People are going to wonder, what happened? What's going on? How come you guys don't talk anymore? You don't have to explain to everyone what went down, what happened, just take this time to grow and just learn to evolve on your new path. And again, my favorite, choosing peace over closure. A lot of times when things fade, you don't end up getting closure. You just have to accept it and just move on. And it's going to be like that for a majority of friendships. When you outgrow someone, you often wonder what happened, or, what did I say? Or you start to think, but sometimes you're not going to get the closure that you so really, really want. And you just have to accept peace. Closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes closure is acceptance. I want you to sit with that for a minute and really think about it. Here are 3 practical reminders. You don't owe everyone access. All right? You don't owe everyone access. Distance doesn't mean hatred. Once again, distance doesn't mean hatred. You can, as I said, I mentioned this before, you can kind of be in someone's life without being in someone's life, if you know what I mean. So from a distance, you acknowledge them, you know what they're going through, you keep them in your thoughts, in your prayers, but it doesn't mean that you hate the individual if you're not really so deep in their life. Peace is proof you made the right choice. And again, in 2026, that's what we're looking for. A lot of us long for peace. And it's an indication that you've made the right choice. Your body is longing for that. Let's get into letting go with love. Letting go with love doesn't mean you pretend it didn't hurt. Let's be real. It's going to hurt. These are individuals, people that, you had a special bond with. You rewrite history, or you force forgiveness overnight. Letting go with love means that you release expectations. And what that means is sometimes you have these expectations of individuals of how they should treat you, or things they should do or live up to. certain standards that you've set in place. And when that goes on and you see nothing is happening, you have to get to the point where you just say, I have to release my expectations. You stop trying to be understood and you choose peace over proximity. I had to learn that closure doesn't always come from conversations. Sometimes closure comes from clarity. And clarity sounds like, this no longer aligns with who I'm becoming. You know, Jesus himself modeled this. He loved people deeply, but he didn't chase those who refuse alignment. And that's a biblical principle. You know what that says to me? It says like you got to shake the dust off your feet. Not in anger, not in pride, but in obedience. Let's get into it's a new year, new alignment. How many of you said new year, new me? You know, this year I'm locking off this person, I'm cutting off that person. New year, things are going to shift, things are going to change. You know, the start of a new year makes people uncomfortable because it forces reflection. And alignment will cost you. It will cost you your old version of yourself, familiar dynamics, comfortable dysfunctions, but alignment will give you peace. And I can honestly say I want peace, especially this year. Peace. It will also give you clarity and capacity for what's next. So basically, what do you have to do? You got to ask yourself, who drains me instead of pouring into me? That's a big one. Examine your circle. Examine those close to you. Ask yourself, where am I performing instead of being? You know, are you living in each moment? You're just showing up and it's just this. Are you actually experiencing and just showing that side of yourself? So, as we touched on, you know, a new year, new alignment, let's get into why outgrowing people is part of alignment. All right. I want to bring it back to purpose and calling, you know, alignment versus attachment. What exactly is that? Alignment is you're lined up with your calling, what it is that you're supposed to be doing, you know, your passion, your dreams, as opposed to attachment means you're a little bit just maybe attached to something negative, attached to someone, attached to places, things, but alignment is more purpose driven. Attachment, I feel, is more of a distraction. How God life shifts your circle when your assignment changes. I've been through this in many seasons. Sometimes if I move on into a new role, people in my previous departments, they no longer connect with me. They no longer reach out. And sometimes you have to shift in order to get closer to what it is that God wants you to do, what it is that, you know, your calling is it's just pulling you closer. So I've seen this a lot throughout my life. Oftentimes when I switch jobs or I move cities, sometimes those friendships don't stay connected. And that's another way that, you know, you outgrow someone is because the attachment starts to fade. Why growth requires pruning. In order to grow, you have to feel the prune. You have to be able to get strong, build your muscles, and just spread your wings and fly. Faith ties into that. People who liked access to you without responsibility. So there's a lot of people who like just being attached to you, but they didn't really serve any purpose. You were always there for them, they weren't there for you. It was like a give, give, give. You were just given and they were just taken. So that's another reason why you have to align with your purpose. I had to sit with the uncomfortable truth that some people didn't miss me. They missed the convenience of me. Let that also sit with you for a little bit. There were people in my life who didn't do anything wrong. And that actually made it harder for me because when someone hurts you, you have permission. You have permission to leave. That's it. No explanation needed. You know, it's just a done deal. But when, they're just stuck, you start questioning yourself. I had moments when I thought, am I being fake? Am I switching up? Or am I just finally being honest about who I'm becoming? And that's something you have to ask yourself. Am I being honest with who I'm becoming? Growth. Growing out those friendships that don't no longer serve you any purpose. Here's a quote I want to drop. Not everyone who starts with you is meant to finish with you. Let that one also sit in. So even in nature, nothing grows without pruning. And sometimes that pruning really, really hurts. Not because it's wrong, but because it's necessary. Here are some examples. New season equals new boundaries. New calling to new conversations. New mindset, new access rules. All right? Everyone doesn't get to go where you're going. And I had to learn that the hard way. I guess I had this with me from high school. I had friends from high school, and I just thought we would always be friends to this day. But life has a way of then you realize that everyone has their own path to go on. And I had to realize everyone doesn't get to go where I'm going. Everyone has their own path to follow. What relationships require me to abandon myself? And that's a big one. I had to evaluate those relationships because those are the relationships that often drain you of, your energy and your true self-worth. Sometimes God removes people, not to punish you, but to protect. That he is doing. He does that to protect you and what he's building inside of you. So just remember that. Let's get into practical ways to let go without bitterness. Let's focus on how is it that you can part ways without feeling bitter or leaving, that negative tone. Here are a few things that helped me. Number one, grief honestly. Don't spiritualize your pain away. You have to grieve honestly. And when I say honestly, people will know what you're going through. You don't act as if what happened didn't hurt you. You're human. You have to give yourself that grace. 2, bless them privately. You don't need to announce your healing. 3, stop rehearsing old conversations. Mental arguments keep emotional ties alive. And you have to stop replaying some of those events or some of the things that they said to you that hurt you, or reliving some of those moments. You just have to let the person go and also let go some of those old conversations. And fourth, trust the gap. Space is where growth does its deepest work. So that's a big, big, big one. You have to trust the gap. Sometimes alone time is good. I was speaking to one of my friends the other day, and she said this year is going to be the year where she's just going to be solo. She's going to do a lot of things on her own. She's not going to have that big crowd, that big circle of friends. She's going to start going to dinner by herself, going to movies on her own, because she's been hurt. She's had a few friendships that didn't really go too well, and she's decided, I need to have that space because I need to grow and just evolve into my own. Which brings us to a segment called Good Things Are Coming. Let me remind you that, especially if letting go feels lonely right now, good things are coming. Good things are coming to the version of you. You choose peace. Good things are coming to the one who stopped forcing alignment. Good things are coming to the one who trusts God enough to release what felt familiar. You didn't lose them. You made room. Room for healthier connections, room for divine alignment, room for life. It's a life that you prayed for. What's meant for you will meet you where you're growing, not where you used to be. If this episode spoke to you, sit with it, journal on it, pray through it. And if you're in a season of outgrowing, do it gentle, do it honestly, do it without bitterness, because letting go with love is a form of maturity. Thank you for spending the time with me on the Monie podcast. If this resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need it. Until next time, stay aligned, stay gentle. Bye for now.